Scrupulosity is one of those conditions that hides in plain sight. It can look like religious devotion, a strong moral compass, or just being someone who takes ethics very seriously. But underneath that appearance, scrupulosity is a form of OCD, and it can be profoundly disruptive in a person's life. In today's video, I want to talk about what scrupulosity is, how it differs from ordinary conscientiousness, and why it's so often misunderstood, not just by the public, but sometimes by even mental health professionals themselves. At its core, scrupulosity is an overconcern with doing the right thing, morally, ethically, legally, or religiously. But it's not just about wanting to be good, it's a compulsive drive to avoid being bad. And that's an important distinction. People with scrupulosity aren't simply motivated by values, they're driven by fear. Fear of doing harm, fear of offending God, fear of being dishonest, fear of becoming corrupt. And more than anything, fear that if they fall short in any way, it means something devastating about who they are. Like other forms of OCD, scrupulosity involves intrusive thoughts, these sudden, unwanted mental images or doubts or urges that can feel deeply disturbing. And in response to those thoughts, the person then engages in compulsions. And sometimes those compulsions are visible, like repeating prayers or confessing sins that aren't sins, or reviewing conversations to make sure they're 100% truthful. Other times the compulsions are internal, mentally checking if they felt sincere enough during a prayer, replaying interactions to scan for moral failure, or silently begging for reassurance from God. So consider some examples. Someone might find themselves stuck on a single line of prayer because they didn't say it with the exact amount of reverence they feel is required. And so they have to start over. And then again, and then again, and then again. What was supposed to be a 5-minute prayer turns into 45 minutes of anxiety and guilt. Another example is a student might spend hours rewriting an assignment, not because of the content, but because they're terrified of accidentally plagiarizing, even if all of their citations are correct. Or imagine someone who sees a religious icon and suddenly has an intrusive thought that feels disrespectful. The thought isn't something they believe, but they feel sick with shame, and immediately they seek out reassurance from a spiritual leader or a priest, or they start silently praying for forgiveness for having this thought. These compulsions aren't about spiritual growth or moral accountability. They're attempts to try and neutralize the anxiety and the discomfort that follows the intrusive thought. And just like in other forms of OCD, that relief is only short lived. The anxiety always comes back, and with it, a renewed need to perform the compulsion. And over time, this cycle gets stronger and stronger. The person becomes more anxious, more ritualistic, and more stuck. Now, scrupulosity can be religious, but it doesn't have to be. In some cases, people focus on legal or moral purity. For example, someone might check their bag multiple times before leaving work to make sure that they didn't accidentally steal a pen. They might avoid telling stories unless they can recall every single detail exactly for fear that they might be lying by omission. They might even avoid using spell check on their computer unless they can somehow acknowledge or credit the software, because not acknowledging that the software helped them write the document, that feels dishonest. This isn't just about being careful. It's not about being a rule follower or a perfectionist. The defining feature of scrupulosity is the level of anxiety, guilt, and mental anguish that gets tied to these thoughts and behaviors. People feel trapped by their own conscience, not guided by it. They're tortured by it. And then there's another layer here that makes scrupulosity especially difficult to live with, and that's the guilt. Now, while many forms of OCD are primarily driven by anxiety, scrupulosity adds the weight of moral guilt on top of that. It's not just, what if I messed up? It's, what if this means I'm a bad person? What if God disapproves of me? What if I've failed to live up to what's expected of me and I can't make it right? That guilt can linger for long after the anxiety fades, and it can be just as debilitating as the anxiety itself. Scrupulosity can affect people of all faiths, and it can also show up in secular people who are deeply concerned with justice or honesty or ethical living. The unifying theme is the obsessive need to do what's right, paired with the paralyzing fear of having done something wrong. And what makes this so hard to treat is that the fears often don't feel irrational. A person might know that their prayer was fine, or that they didn't actually steal anything, or that their intrusive thought doesn't reflect their beliefs, but it doesn't feel that way. The doubt still lingers, the fear still gnaws at them, and they feel compelled to act on it just in case. And this leads to something we call overvalued ideation. Many people with OCD recognize that their thoughts are unreasonable, even if they can't stop the behavior. But with scrupulosity, that line gets blurry. The fears can feel morally justified. They can sound like a genuine call to conscience, even though they're coming from the disorder. And that's why scrupulosity can be so difficult to diagnose and so difficult to treat. The very thing that makes it a disorder, the rigidity, the self doubt, the compulsive guilt, that gets mistaken for virtue. Scrupulosity also frequently overlaps with certain personality traits. People who struggle with it tend to be more perfectionistic, more conscientious, and detail oriented, and sometimes overly responsible. These aren't bad traits. In fact, they're often praised. But in the context of OCD, they can fuel the disorder. When someone holds themselves to an impossibly high standard and also believes that any failure is a moral failure, then those are ripe conditions for scrupulosity to take hold. And all of this adds up to a level of daily functioning that's often severely impaired by the scrupulosity. People might be late to work because they were stuck in a ritual. They might avoid social situations where they could say something wrong. They might confess repeatedly to things that they didn't do or seek constant reassurance that they're not secretly evil or dishonest. They may even avoid therapy for fear that therapy is incompatible with their religious or moral values. Now, to someone from the outside, this could all look like just overthinking. But for the person experiencing it, it's so much deeper than just overthinking. It's a tormenting sense that they're not okay, and that if they don't do something to fix it, they could be condemned, rejected, or ruined. They're not just trying to reduce anxiety, they're trying to protect their soul, their integrity, or their place in the world. That's why scrupulosity isn't just about religion or morality, it's about identity. The disorder attaches itself to parts of a person's life that matter most to them, whether that's their faith, their ethics, or their sense of personal responsibility. Scrupulosity turns these values against the person and makes the values a source of fear. And perhaps most painfully, it distorts the very experiences that are meant to bring people comfort or connection. Prayer, community, spiritual reflection, clear conscience. Instead of being sources of meaning or strength, these experiences become battlegrounds for doubt and compulsions. The person feels more distant from their values, not closer to them. And so, if you're wondering whether scrupulosity may be at play in your life or in the life of someone you care about, the key signs to look for are intensity of guilt or anxiety, the compulsive behaviors aimed at neutralizing moral or spiritual fears, and the impact that these patterns have on daily functioning. This isn't about having high standards or being deeply committed to your beliefs. It's about being stuck in a relentless cycle of fear and reassurance that hijacks those beliefs and undermines your ability to live fully and meaningfully. Scrupulosity is a complicated and deeply misunderstood condition. But the place to start is to recognize that the thoughts and behaviors, no matter how convincing they seem, are symptoms of a disorder, not evidence that someone is a bad person or spiritually broken. And in the next video, we'll talk about what treatment looks like for scrupulosity, how people can start to loosen the grip of scrupulosity, change the patterns that keep them stuck, and reclaim a sense of peace and purpose in your life. And if you're interested in watching that video, I'll link to it here once it's been posted. So that's all for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one.